Yo, what is going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about the booty. You heard me right. We're talking about butts. Specifically, we want to talk about guys' butts, okay? Track with me here. For a long time, women in the fitness industry have owned the avenue of glutes, booty, butt workouts. But according to Google searches, men are now asking, how can they grow their butt? So today we're gonna talk about exactly that. What are the best ways to grow your butt? And to be honest, this isn't anything new. If we wanna have a history lesson, we can talk about the Greeks and the Romans and their art and their statues and their obsession with fitness and physiques, and specifically fit butts. I mean, honestly, today we can look at the same thing. Thank you, Chris Evans, Captain America, for showing us what a great butt looks like.
That is America's ass.
I mean, to be honest, that man put in a lot of work, a lot of time, and brought a physique that was really incredible to the screen. And let's be real, he had a great butt. So let's talk about the movements that are gonna get you a great butt, the movements that, in my opinion, aren't gonna get you a great butt, and then a little bit of everything in between. We're gonna have a good time. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscription button, give this video a like. And as you're following along, there's no reason why at the end of this video, you too can't have a booty America's proud of. So to kick things off, let's first talk about what do your glutes actually do and how to train them. So we can go all scientific and break down the three muscles that make up your glutes, but I'd rather just talk about the overall functionality of your butt muscles. So number one, we have hip rotation. Number two, we have hip abduction, abduction. And then number three, we have hip extension, okay? These are going to be the three primary things that your butt does for you. Now, in these three planes of movement, honestly, one of them is going to be the best plane to have some type of hypertrophic growth within your glutes. So we can first throw out hip rotation. While hip rotation is incredibly important, I think it's very important for things like plyometrics and especially for warming up before an exercise. But one, the movement's so small that you can't really get any range of motion out of it. And then also, it's such a delicate movement because there's a lot of hip joint socket rotation, a la hip rotation. We can't really load it up safely and make it a movement worth using in order to grow your glutes. Same thing also goes for hip abduction. Now, hip abduction is super important because it gives us the ability to open up and close our hips. But again, it's really hard to load up this movement with a lot of weight. And there are machines, there is a hip abduction machine, which is a really good machine to use, I think, for a warm up or maybe something to use at the end of a workout. But again, there's not a lot of range of motion here. We can't load it up. And you also see people doing things with cables, using cables for hip abduction. Honestly, this is just a less efficient way of using a hip abduction machine. If your gym doesn't have a hip abduction machine, you can use cables, but you can't load it as much. It's not as stable. And again, the range of motion isn't great. And so all three of those things are very important when it comes to actually getting muscle growth, because hip rotation and hip abduction, we don't get a lot of range of motion. We can't load it very well. They're just not gonna be great for actually building the glute muscle. So then this leads us with hip extension. This is going to be the bread and butter to your workout if you want to grow your glutes. Hip extension is going to look like knee flexion and hip extension. What does that mean? Well, there's some movements that I think are key to growing your glutes. These four movements are gonna put you in some type of knee flexion or hip extension. This plane of motion is going to give you the best adaptation for growing your glutes, and so that when you work your way through your program, you can get that Steve Rogers booty. Now, there are a lot of movements that are going to be optimal for training glutes in hip extension, and there's gonna be a lot of movements that are suboptimal. And to be honest, when I'm at the gym, I see people doing the craziest things, trying to grow their glutes, trying to work on their booty, and it's just ridiculous. And I'm not trying to bash anyone here, but there truly are optimal movements that will get you a lot further than doing these crazy Smith machine, whatever you wanna call these things, okay? It's just not ideal. You also are gonna get everyone staring you at the gym, which I guess if that's what you want, by all means, go nuts. But don't kid yourself, this is a less than optimal movement for growing your glutes. So in order to cut through all this chaos and really talk about what's ideal and what's optimal, these are the four movements that are going to give you the best bang for buck and grow that booty. Number one is going to be the squat. This is the knee flexion movement I was talking about. Now, squatting can be done in a lot of different ways. We have back squats, we have hack squats, we have heels elevated squats. Honestly, you can really take your pick of any of these movements. The biggest thing is that you feel the adaptation happening, or you feel the pump, okay? You should be getting a good butt pump when you, I can't. You should be getting a good pump in your glutes. I know it's ridiculous, but yes, a good pump in your glutes if the movement is right for you. So when you're squatting, pick a squat that gives you that feeling of pump. That's what we're looking for. That's usually a really good sign that the movement is hitting the muscles it's supposed to be hitting, okay? Some of the big things when it comes to squatting is going to be range of motion. Range of motion is going to be king when it comes to any type of squat movement. You've all heard the term ass to grass. Now, obviously I want you to stay safe in your squatting, but at the same time, your ability to find depth in your squat is going to be what puts your hip into extension, okay? So the lower you are in the squat, the more extension your hip is going into, the more range of motion, which is going to lead to better growth in the long run. Which again is why I love things like hack squats or heel elevated squats, because it allows me to get so much deeper in that squat in a really safe way. A lot of people like using leg presses. They think it's an optimal leg movement, but in my opinion, it's just hard to get the range of motion that you can get in that squat. Not saying you can't use it. Again, if it's something that gives you that pump feeling, then by all means use it. But for myself, I've never really had good luck using a leg press just because I feel like I can't get that range of motion. Number 2 in my movements is going to be the Romanian deadlift or the traditional deadlift. Now again, there's 1,000,001 different ways you can deadlift. I prefer using a barbell or a dumbbell. I get the best results with that. And again, it gives me really good range of motion. The biggest thing here, and what I see a lot of people screw up when they're deadlifting, is they start allowing their erectors and back to do most of the work versus their hamstrings and glutes. You want to pull with your hamstrings and glutes when you're coming out of the bottom of that deadlift. And the same way, when we're going into that extension and we're lowering into that movement, we need to try to get as deep as we can to feel that stretch in your glutes and your hamstrings. That stretch is what is, again, building the muscle, giving that hypertrophic response in the glutes. Number 3, this one's more of an isolated movement, but a hip thrust. Now, there's barbell hip thrust, there's machine hip thrust, there's other machine hip thrusts. I prefer to use a machine hip thrust because having a barbell dig into my hips is not my favorite thing in the world. And so if your gym has a machine hip thrust, I think it is an excellent tool to build your glutes. The fact that it's so isolated to your glutes and you can also load it up with a ton of weight makes it very optimal to growing that muscle. Yes, there is some hamstring involved in a hip thrust, but much less than there would be in a squat or an RDL or something like that. So by all means, if your gym has a hip thrust machine, it is a great tool to add into your lower body booty day. Last but not least is going to be single leg movements. The 2 movements that I found that worked really well for me is a split squat and a reverse lunge. The split squat I love because it allows you to get so deep into that extension, and then powering up through that bottom, you can really isolate just that solid cheek. Yes, the butt cheek. It really lets you isolate through one leg with that unilateral movement, which in my opinion gives you a great pump and a great fatigue level that I'm looking for when I'm doing hypertrophy training. The second movement, the reverse lunge. When I do my reverse lunges, I actually prefer to do one leg at a time because this allows me to take that back leg and put it past my front leg at the contraction. That way I can get a really good squeeze in my glute in that movement. Adding in some single leg movements like reverse lunge and split squat can elevate your glute game a ton. And if you properly program them into the workout, there's no reason why these 2 movements can't optimize your leg workout. Now, these are the 4 movement plans that I found to work really well for me in growing my glutes. And there's other movements you can do within those planes, but I've just found them to be a lot less optimal and just not really worth your time unless you're really trying to, I don't know, if you're like a pro bodybuilder and you want to spend a lot more time with more volume and you can't add more volume in some of these compound lifts. And so things like kickbacks, just, again, you might feel the glute squeeze. Just in my opinion, they're less optimal. You can't load it up enough with weight to make it worth your time to use to grow your glutes. Also, there's this weird side like leg press kick thing I see people do all the time in the gym. Again, this puts your knee at a really high risk, and so I don't think this is an optimal movement. I actually think it's very dangerous, especially if you're gonna add load to it enough to actually see some type of adaptation happen. So please do not use this movement. I just think that the risk reward here is just not worth it. And to be honest, as you can see, it's really hard to get into this position and out of this position. And maybe I'm just not good at it, but I just feel like it is not optimal for your leg workouts. Now, to kind of tie a bow around it and put it all together, if you use these movements, you progress them well, you use progressive overload, you eat food to grow your muscles, any of these movements I talked about are gonna be incredibly beneficial in growing your glutes. Just give yourself time, make sure you're using progressive overload, and make sure you're eating enough food to actually see the muscle grow. So there you have it. Those are the 4 movement planes that I love to work in. Those are the kind of specific movements I use on my lower body day. And if you utilize them correctly, I guarantee you, you're gonna have Bambi legs leaving the gym. You're gonna feel like Leonardo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street, just crawling out of your Ferrari. That's what we all wanna feel like at the end of a leg day. And again, at the end of the day, you're gonna get that booty. Steve Rogers is gonna cry when he sees that booty, and America's gonna be proud of that booty. Thanks for following along, guys. That's all I have for you today. If you liked what you saw, leave a comment. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Until next time, peace.
Can you please edit like a peach?